Fulton Sheen, God and the Intelligence in Modern Philosophy. Chapter 2. The Modern Attack on the Intelligence. B. Attack on the intelligence considered in its operation. If the purpose of the intellect as a faculty has been exaggerated in the past, it would seem true also that the value of its operations have been grossly misrepresented. Here a few elementary facts may help to fix the misrepresentations. The three operations of the intellect are, it will be recalled, apprehension, judgment, and reasoning. Apprehension is the act by which the intelligence sees or perceives something without affirming or denying it. Judgment is the act of the mind by which it unites in affirming and separates in denying certain predicates of a given subject. Example, Peter is a mortal, or Peter is not a quadruped. Reasoning is the act of the mind by which it passes from a truth already known to another truth not previously known. A. Abstraction. The absurdity of abstraction is said to be evident once its process has been explained. According to the modern conception, abstraction may be represented as either additive or subtractive. Additive's abstraction is the consideration of the elements which are to be found common in phenomena, without any regard for their differences. It is essentially a human production. It is obtained by considering some special aspect in which certain experiences, resembling one another, as mentally isolated from the aspects in which they differ. The additive, abstractive process, thus understood, applied to any army passing in review, would be the consideration of the most common element in it, the uniform, for example. The poverty of the abstractive process, then, is immediately revealed in the scantiness of the knowledge it gives us. In the words of Professor Stout, abstraction is the name given to the method by which the universal is found, that method being, we are told, to have out what is different in the particular instances compared and to add together what they possess in common. If we look at the actual procedure of thought, we do not find this account confirmed. Gold, silver, copper, and lead differ in color, brilliancy, weight, and density, but their universal, which we call metal, is not found on comparison by simply leaving out these differences without compensation. Life does not proceed by the association and addition of elements. Abstraction at bottom is their essential, unlifelike. Besides the additive abstraction, there is also the subtractive abstraction of which Taine spoke. Here the mind considers the common elements not directly but indirectly. The additive abstraction adds the common notes. The subtractive abstraction strips off common notes. It is the concave side of additive abstraction. It may be represented as a peeling process. Imagine an essence in the center of the onion by which it is intelligible. In order to get to the essence of the onion, must be peeled, each peel corresponding to an individuating note. The botanist who wishes to describe the artichoke describes the stem, the root, the leaves. The metaphysician eliminates all that and studies the rest. This manner of procedure, exposed in this form, seems absurd. It is, however, that of the metaphysicians. When it is a question of living beings, they eliminate all the psychochemical phenomena. This elimination made, they suppose that there still remains something. If the poverty of the intellectual method be revealed in the mere considerations of its abstractive process, its complete Uselessness is said to be revealed in the idea or the concept which it gives us. In most recent years, the attack on the concept has become less marked, it now being accepted as a foregone conclusion that it has been proved worthless. There is no use in beating a dead dog. Whatever philosophical criticism is given today is the great part of representation of that made by the great French academic Henri Bergson. It is under his leadership that the intellectualist position has met its severest attacks, and it is round his arguments that all modern anti-intellectualists rally, not only to his anti-intellectualism, but also to his positive doctrine. English philosophy is profoundly indebted. The greater portion of English and American philosophy which has appeared in recent years is Bergosian in inspiration. In giving the critique of M. Bergson, we are giving one which is original, forceful, and sincere. B. Concept. The general criticism of the concept, under which fall all the particular criticisms, is that the concept is naturally unsuited for life. It is unsuited for life for three reasons. 1. It substitutes a symbol for reality. 2. It solidifies movement. 3. It breaks up what is continuous and successive. 1. The primary condition that a concept must fulfill, if it is to be suited for life, is that it gives reality itself and not a mere symbol of reality. Life deals with realities and not with figures, with substances and not with shadows. But a concept gives merely figures, shadows, and symbols, and is consequently unsuited for the purpose of life. At best, it gives us merely a rubric under which we write all living beings, or a frame in which we place an infinity of objects, one alongside the other. The concept man, for example, is such a scheme under which all the individual men in the world are grouped. It has the advantage of extension, it is true, but it reveals nothing about the nature of the reality. It lacks comprehension, and it's lacking that it fails to attain reality. The mind in the face of reality merely stamps out a ticket or gives a receipt, which is valuable for all objects of that class. But this ticket or receipt is in no way representative of reality. It is a mere symbol of sequende, that is, no longer remembered as such. In generating concepts, the mind generates signs, institutes, relations, and analogies, substitutes its representations and its disconnected language for the direct voice of all simple things. Concepts give us the world of representations, as in a cage of glazed glass, where we are in a contact with products of industry. Artifacts, very much as in a museum, where under the pretext of a lesson on the things in themselves, we know the field of wheat only by a dry straw glued to a pasteboard, along with one dead sample. To accept this symbol or the substitute, the secondin of the real, as the real itself, is no less foolish, according to M. Blondel, than for a young lover, in the presence of his fiancée, to continue to look at her photograph instead of looking at her. And furthermore, if the concept is a mere substitute for reality, there is necessarily an unabridgable distance between mind and object. How can the subject ever know the object if a mere rubric or frame or symbol insists on putting itself between the two? It would seem, therefore, from the mere consideration of the concept considered in itself, that the intelligence is characterized, as M. Bergson has told us, by a natural unfitness for life. 2. It solidifies movement. The first characteristic of life is movement. So fundamental is this characteristic that immobility is often taken as the first apparent sign of death. Not only is the individual life in movement, but the whole universe with it, whether it be organically or biologically considered. Evolution is in the background of all modern science. What does the intellect do in the face of the movement? First of all, to seize movement, it must break it up by taking snapshots of it. The multitudinous photographs, which are quickly run through a moving picture machine, introduce an extrinsic and impersonal movement, but in themselves they are not photographs of the movement. Neither is the concept expressive of movement, but merely snapshots of it. Whether it is busy at this work, life, which is fluid, is passing away all the time. Then again, to represent movement, it must fall back on the juxtaposition of these snapshots, as is done in the moving picture machine. It represents the becoming as a series of states, of which each one is homogeneous with itself and consequently does not change. Life is liquid. Abstraction is solid. One therefore cannot represent the other. The Humpty Dumpty that fell from the wall, with the help of all the king's horses and all the king's men, could never be put together again. So neither can life be constructed in its liquid wholeness, once it has been solidified by thought. Out of no amount of discreteness can you manufacture the concrete. In virtue of this tendency to solidify, which is proper to the intelligence, it remains incapable of ever ceasing novelty and creation. Our intelligence is satisfied with a consequence determined in function of determined antecedents, or means determined in function of determined end. But novelty and creation have no antecedents. The intelligence therefore remains incapable of ever grasping them. Furthermore, since all life is in evolution, and since an eternal devenir is at the bottom of all things, is not the intelligence itself a mere emanation of this evolution, and just a product of its process? To say, therefore, that the intelligence can grasp evolution is to say the part can grasp the whole, and obviously this is absurd. 3. It breaks up what is continuous and successive. The universe is continuum. It is an organic whole. Its growth is biological, not crystalline. The senses reveal this continuity. If we but run our fingers over a surface, we are in contact with it continuously. But what does the intelligence do in the face of this continuity? It breaks up the continuous into discrete parts. It represents time by a constant instead of representing it as a continuous succession or flux. This analytic, static character of the intelligence is due to its very nature, from the moment it comes from the hands of nature. It was destined for inorganic solids. It can better handle reality for its practical uses by splitting it up, and for this reason it has been the idle faculty for mechanics. Every division of matter into independent bodies of absolute determined shapes is artificial. This the intelligence does of necessity. The conclusion which contemporary thought draws from this critique is that the intelligence is smitten by general incapacity to understand life. It gives only dead, conceptual symbols instead of living realities. It reveals the dynamic as static, the concrete as abstract, the fluid as a solid, and the living as inert. Following it, we are brought to ease only in the discontinuous, the immobile, and death. An additional word about judgment and reasoning may be desirable. The elements which enter into judgment are concepts, but the concepts, according to the findings of contemporary thought, are not representative of the real, but mere substitutes for it. The judgment, then, will share the shortcoming of its elements and fail in like manner to reach reality. The consequence is that we will henceforth be less interested in the truth of judgment than in their value. The fundamental importance of this philosophy of value will be clearly seen in our treatment of religious experience. The third operation of the mind is reasoning, by which the mind passes from the known to the unknown truth. But what is reasoning but the combination of concepts and judgments? Both of these, according to the modern position, are inadequate for life. Reasoning based on them must then of necessity be worthless. Mr. Bertrand Russell tells us that the reason and analysis are blind gates leading to the morass of illusion. So far the first headlong attack upon the reasoning powers. We turn to pass rapidly in review some of the philosophies that have contributed to the anti-intellectualist's assault by disparaging all proof, and by discarding truth. A philosophy without proofs is wanted for men of action who propose something and do not want to be restrained by the necessity of giving reasons for it. It would seem that knowledge concerning the universe as a whole is not to be obtained by metaphysics, and that the proposed proofs that, in virtue of the laws of logic, such and such thing must exist, and such others cannot, or not capable of surviving careful scrutiny. We find an assumption that was the soul of scholasticism. The assumption, namely, that anything that is necessary in the way of belief must be susceptible of articulate proof, as rampant as it ever was in the religious agnosticism of today, and we find it, moreover, blossoming out into corollaries, as, for instance, that to believe anything without such proof is to be unscientific, and that to be unscientific is the lowest depth to which a man can fall. Professor James, thanks to the influence of M. Henry Bergson, came to emancipate himself completely from all logic. For my part, I have found myself compelled to give up logic, fairly squarely and irrevocably. It has an imperishable use in human life, but that use is not to make us acquainted with the essential nature of reality. Reality, life, experience, concreteness, immediacy, use what word you will, exceeds our logic, overflows and surrounds it. Vision, then, and not proof, is the supreme way of attaining truth. A man's vision is the great fact about him. Who cares for Corelli's reason, or Schopenhauer's or Spinoza's philosophy is the expression of men's most intimate character, and all definitions of the universe are but the deliberately adopted reactions of human character upon it. Philosophy is only a matter of passionate vision rather than of logic. Logic only finding reasons for the vision afterwards. Emotional congeniality and social prestige precede it. Demonstration attaches itself to constancy, but constancy is an attribute of the intellectualist's position. Proofs, therefore, must be made less exacting. Abstract constancy, Dr. Bradley tells us, is a superstitious idolatry. And when speaking of the subject of religion and the need of logic and constancy in treating of its subject matter, he asks, is there any need for us to avoid self-contradiction? Sir Henry Jones would not go so far, but he would stop at contraries. We cannot rest in contradiction, but we can be content with opposites. What all philosophy up to this time has called contradiction is now really only a choice of things more or less satisfactory, not merely in theory, but in the very act of philosophizing itself. The fundamental principles of thought are removed from their lofty and absolute position and made something relative and changing. Thus, in the free philosophy of vision, loosened from the straitjacket of intellectualism, we must not be shocked to find such statements as this: the contradiction of a conation coexisting with the fruition must be realized. The modern mind is not long in choosing between the apparent discord of healthy moral sentiment and the artificial moral cemetery of a philosophic system. Not only will constancy and logic cease to be the ideal of modern thought, but even truth itself will cease to be the ideal. Professor Radhikrishan is enumerating the characteristics of modern thought, pointing this out as important. Now we do not care, he writes, to ascertain whether an opinion is true or false, but only whether it is life-furthering, life-preserving. We start with a certain view of life, think of a few things as necessary to it, and conclude that they are true and objective. Impulse to knowledge and love of truth cease to be the motives of philosophy, and some moral ideas or religious prejudices, which we wish to defend even at the cost of constancy, take their place. So true is this that one of the modern thinkers explicitly states the condition upon which you accept his conclusion that you cease to use the truth. No one is likely to content himself with the doctrine which I advocate if he believes there is no truth except the truth which is self-consistent and ultimate. Truth is not an end of dialectics. It is merely a preliminary means to other vital satisfactions. There is no reason to set up a peculiar process of verification for the satisfying of an intellectual interest, different in kind from the rest, superior in dignity, and autocratic in authority. For there is no pure intellect. M. Leroy goes even further than his English colleagues. It is not a question of being right or wrong. It is a remark of great coarseness to wish to be right. It is a testimony of a great want of culture. Even the source of truth itself is to be suspected of being polluted. We are bound to conclude. One recent author tells us that in the cosmic ordering of human life, the spirit of the world must have something else to do than to be reasonable as we count reasonableness. It is probable that not reasonableness, but dramatic completeness may be the chief unifying quality of man's life. If the term truth is to be retained, it is merely to mean that which works well, or the satisfyingness of conclusion, or its cash value in terms of particular experience. Briefly, intellectualism, according to the modern doctrine, is an enemy of life. It is cold, inert, unsympathetic. Its symbol is the cold and perfect image of Minerva at the top of the Pantheon, the serenity of whose visage express all the certitudes, the folds of whose marble robes have all the Semitic rigidity of the syllogism, whose tranquil Roman ways of the intelligence. The science of the metaphysics, which has reared itself upon these lifeless foundations, must therefore cease to calm a worth for itself. It must always take in its final form an idiosyncrasy, and its final form it is a work of imagination superimposed upon other works of imagination, or, in the well-known words of Dr. Bradley, the science of giving bad reasons for what we believe on instinct. Intellectualism is consequently a highly defective philosophical method. It is a besetting sin, even the very original sin of thought, and a beast. Imagination is superior to the intellect, and this for no less than 16 reasons. Aesthetics surpasses it as a clue to reality. The artistic vision of Apollo is superior to the logic of Socrates. Marguerite is worth more than Aristotle. Belphegor is superior to Minerva. But yesterday the word of reason might have stood against the world. Now lies it there, and none so poor to do it reverence. Chapter 3. Rejection of the demonstrability of God's existence and some new approaches. It follows from the preceding train of thought that the theism of philosophical research, in which the idea of God is arrived at by a process of reflective thought, must give way to the theism of religious consciousness, for which God is in some way an immediate object. The system which, starting with the intellectual standpoint, moves along with the intellectual action of man, must give way to the other which begins from the standpoint of religion and moves along with the religious and spiritual experience. Contemporary thought is particularly unanimous upon this point. In 1904, Professor James Pratt sent to William James a list of questions on the subject of religious belief. In answer to the question, "Why do you believe in God?" "Is it from argument?" the Harvard professor answered emphatically, "No. All arguments for the existence of God is regarded as illusory." In his work, The Religious Experience, he made his answer clearer. Can the existence of God be proven? No. The book of Job went over this whole matter once for all and definitely. Ratiocination is a relatively superficial and unreal path to the deity. It will lay my hand upon my mouth. I have heard of thee by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye seeth thee. Then, in his own graphic style, he goes on to tell us what this happened to the proofs. That vast literature of proofs for God's existence, drawn from the order of nature, which a century ago seemed to be so overwhelmingly convincing, today does little more than to gather dust in libraries, for the simple reason that our generation has ceased to believe in a kind of God that must be argued for. The arguments for God's existence have stood for hundreds of years, with the waves of unbelieving criticism breaking against them, never totally destroying them in the ears of the faithful, but on the whole slowly and surely washing away the mortar from between their joints. Modern philosophy is so convinced of the uselessness of the proofs of God's existence that it has ceased to give reasons for ignoring them. It is in possession of the fact, and that is quite sufficient. For this reason, one looks in vain in the most recent theistic literature for a sound criticism of the proofs. They have long since passed the critical stage in which critical minds find them convincing, and they are gradually approaching the stage in which men gradually cease to find them interesting. The inaugural address on philosophy at the University of Edinburgh in 1919, which summarized contemporary thought, gave its witness to the general opinion of the impossibility of proving, by dialectical arguments, the existence of God. Professor Alexander, in his Gifford Lectures, asserted the fact that no one now is convinced by the traditional arguments of the existence of God. Mr. William L. Davidson, in his work Recent Theistic Discussions, declares it to be obvious that God's existence cannot in any sense of the term be proven, while Dr. Carr, in his Theory of Monads, is none the less emphatic. I maintain that it is not the cosmological or teleological or any other logical argument from which has sprung our idea of God. Manifestly, the proofs have fallen on evil times. While there is thus the widest difference of opinion, there is a curious unanimity as to the needlessness of all the demonstrative methods of the intellect in the domain of religious phenomena. Anyone who should attempt to revive them in a really philosophical work would be looked upon with the same suspicion as a scientist who would seek to revive the four-element theory of the ancients. A member of the Aristotelian Society of England has put them beyond hope. We cannot hope, he writes, by intellectually seeking to find out God. At present, then, the proofs have merely an historical interest. The very word proofs is written in quotation marks to indicate that a value has been attributed to them which they really do not possess. The opinion among contemporary thinkers on this matter is unanimous. There are not to be found so intellectually poor to do reverence to the proofs for the existence of God. To the modern mind, these proofs, when presented in their traditional garb, stalk about with the unsubstantiality of ghosts. They were mighty, but they vanished. Names are all they left behind them. The reason for the rejection of the proofs is distinct from the fact that their rejection, but the fact, has become so much stressed that little attention is given to the reason. The argument most often given, strangely enough, is the argument from authority, to wit, the great Kantian tradition. The critique which Kant directed against the proofs is accepted as final and absolute. The fatal defects all these traditional arguments have, it is almost universally conceded, been clearly expressed once and for all by Kant. The bare fact that all idealists since Kant felt entitled to scant or neglect them shows they are not solid enough to serve as religion's all-sufficient foundation. More to him than to anyone else, this changed attitude towards the proofs must be traced. Through his efforts, they have been discredited and have lost all their interests. Another idea urged against the proofs is their peculiar reference to the problem of religion. Some regard them as worthless through being so intimately bound up with religion, while others find them worthless because they are not sufficiently bound to religion. Professor Hornell, for example, repudiates the proofs because of their uselessness when divorced from their basis in religion, while Professor Sorley discards them because they have always been associated with religion.